Red Rose Radio is 21 today. Now, on this special milestone, Rock FM is taking time out to look back at its history. 97.4 Rock FM.
Coming up in the next hour, we'll be looking back over the last 21 years since we started broadcasting as Red Rose Radio. We'll be hearing from some of the most famous voices in our history.
He piled his underwear and tyres up against the fire exit and lit it with a can of petrol.
Playing some of the biggest hits from the last 2 decades. And we'll hear some times when everything went completely pear-shaped.
That is so rude! The boat is targeted by bombers. Sandra Bullock...
Sorry, excuse me.
Red Rose Radio.
First, let's go right back to the start. What was the world like in 1982 when we made our first broadcast? Well, the future heir to the throne, Prince William, he was born. The Queen had something of a rude awakening when she found a man sitting on the end of her bed in Buckingham Palace. It wasn't Prince Philip, I hasten to add. Countdown went on air for the first time. Of course, the Falklands War was in full swing. And in sport, England were dumped out of the World Cup. At least it wasn't on penalties that time, though, eh? And of course, we went on air for the very first time.
It's 6 o'clock on Tuesday, the 5th of October, 1982. I'm delighted to welcome you to our first day of broadcasting here on Red Rose Radio.
Now, you know how radio stations all have their own jingles? Well, here's the very first one we had. It does sound a bit dated now, doesn't it? But at the time, that was the tune everyone in the Northwest was humming, and I guarantee by the end of these 60 minutes, you'll be humming it too. So, apart from that first announcement we've just heard, who had the privilege of being the first voice on the station?
Red Rose reports, this is Michael Green. The main stories this morning...
That's right, it was journalist Mike Green. So what did that feel like?
Huge excitement. I mean, not only was the public of Lancashire really eagerly awaiting this new radio station, and there'd been lots of meetings and campaigns before that. I mean, we didn't only feel sort of responsible coming on air at that time, but it was really brought home to me on the first morning by the fact that there were so very many people in the station at about 6 in the morning. There were about 40 or 50 people in reception, all listening to the output. So whilst, I mean, I'd done some broadcasting for about 8 or 10 years before that, and one doesn't get nervous thinking about the radio audience, but the fact that there's about 50 pairs of eyes staring through the glass at you was a little bit off-putting.
So we've heard what the news was like back then, but where did we find our presenters? I've often wondered when you start a radio station, where do you go looking? Well, Red Rose Radio went looking in some pretty strange places, as it happens. Steve Collins was on air that first morning, so where do they find him?
A ladies' clothes shop in Oxford Street in London, and running a little in-store radio station called Radio Top Shop, and was trying desperately to get into real radio, and sent off a demo tape, and that's where he found me. Top Shop in Oxford Circus. It was the early days of commercial radio, and in some respects I think it was a lot more fun because we were learning rather than these days when there's a lot of history that we can draw upon. So we had a lot of fun with Dave Lincoln, Alan Bezic, Harry Rowell in the early days. We just were all in it together, learning, getting on with it, and having a good laugh.
Now, Red Rose Radio, of course, has always had to be a successful business as well as just a radio station, and it's been successful since day one, in fact. Here's the first ever sales director, Peter Salt.
Well, Red Rose was the first commercial radio station in the UK to make a profit in its first year, and this was mainly down to the fact that the then managing director, David Maker, had picked a magnificent management team. He allowed everybody to get on with their jobs without any interference. I ran, obviously, the sales and marketing side of the company. I was allowed to get on and promote the station in a very, very aggressive and high-profile way. We had some very good directors at the time, Russell Harty, Victoria Wood, Clive Lloyd and Bill Beaumont, and obviously we used their profile to promote the station.
Another thing that was different about the early days was that there wasn't anywhere near as much pop music on the air as there is now. Simon Tate joined in 1983.
I was the first person actually to do a music show in the evening on what was then Red Rose Radio, of course. Up until then, it's really weird. You've got to remember that we had the old, not the Radio Authority back then, but the Independent Broadcasting Authority looking over us, and we had to do a certain amount of shows of a very specialist nature. So you had music, you had all sorts of specialist music shows. Like there was a brass show, and there was a classical music show, and there was a show which was all about education, and there was a show called Town Hall. And all these, I used to have to, what we used to call drive the tapes in. I used to play the tapes in the evening after doing a 2-hour music show, which began, I think, in September 1983. Up until then, we'd not had any music in the evenings.
So when Simon Tate was playing these songs in the evening, what kind of thing would he be playing? Well, let's have a listen to some of them.
Every breath you take, the bottom of my heart.
One of the big stars of the early years was a guy called Alan Bezic. In fact, he was probably the first radio superstar in this region. If you don't know who he is, he ran a phone-in show in the early 80s, and he made his name by slagging off, putting down and hanging up on his callers. In fact, he was the first presenter in the UK ever to do that, really. Until then, DJs were really nice to their listeners and treated them with some kind of respect, but he used to rip them to shreds.
Ring him if you dare.
Alan Bezic, the late night show.
You get the idea from that little jingle we played you there. He was a bit nasty. But if you're going to dish it out, you've got to expect to get your fair share back again. And Alan remembers one time when a listener really took the hump with him.
I was sat there, and people think there's about 50 of you in the building. There was me, Billy, the world's ugliest doorman, and then there was Irene answering the phones. That's it. That's the full population at 1 o'clock in the morning. And I went, if you'll pardon the expression, for a pee. I mean, 4 hours is a long time to be without, and I went for a pee. I put Rod Stewart on, 6 minutes, you can do out in 6 minutes. Most of it you can do twice. And I went for a pee, and I come back and I said to Billy, I've just been to the toilet and I've come back and I can smell burning. All right, he said, well, that'll be because a bloke set fire to the door. It's true. A bloke set fire to the door. He piled his underwear. I don't know how that came out of it. He piled his underwear and tyres up against the fire exit and lit it with a can of petrol. And Billy, in his wisdom, thought, well, there's no point bothering Bezic. He's a bit busy. I'll put it out. And he kicked the tyres away, put it out, and never even told me. So that's the kind of support you get. But there was another lot as well. We were coming out about 2 o'clock, and Billy, he was an old soldier, Billy, so he wasn't much of a volunteer. And I came out and he said, are you thinking of going home now? And I said, well, it's 2 o'clock in the morning, you know, I go home every night. And he said, I won't go yet. I said, why not? He says, there's 4 lads outside in a car with a rifle. And I said, what? He says, somebody's phoned in and told me there's blokes outside with a rifle. And he said, they're not after me. Thanks, Billy, thanks very much. And he said, they're out there, they've got a gun. I said, well, what are you doing? He said, I'm doing beggar all, mate. He said, but I've called the cops. And the cops came, to be fair, and we watched them from upstairs. The cops came and surrounded this car and made them get out and lie on the floor. You know, like you see in American films, they made them lie on the floor like that, lay down there, prostrate on the floor. These poor lads were 4 lads. They were going fishing at 4 o'clock in the morning. They said, we'll go and see Bezic when he comes out. They're only going fishing. It was a fishing rod. Billy thought it was funny. I thought it was funny. The fishermen, well, you know, they got an autograph. What more do they want?
Anyway, you'll be pleased to know that Alan did survive that arson attempt and avoided coming to any more serious grief at the hands of angry listeners. In fact, he went on to become extremely popular. And in 1985, at the Sony Radio Awards...
The nominees in the category for the Local Radio Personality of the Year are Alan Bezic of Red Rose Radio in Preston, Brian Hayes of LBC, and Roland Myers of BBC Radio Sussex.
3 nominations.
And the winner is Alan Bezic of Red Rose Radio.
Alan Bezic of Red Rose Radio. Others nominated, Brian Hayes of LBC in London and Roland Myers of BBC.
Okay. A-double-L-A-N. My mum said if they don't get that right, go home. What are you meant to say? I never know what you say to these things because I've never been before. And I'm dead nervous because there's more people in here than ever listen to me on the radio, I tell you. And for all the ones that have been up here, they know it's like being in a cathedral. All you see is candles everywhere. It's amazing. But I would just like to say thank you to a few people. Like, for example, a guy at BBC Radio, Carlisle, who first gave me a job, actually proper being me on the wireless. And we did like 7 weeks of a phone-in on a Sunday morning at 11 o'clock. And as soon as it ended, after the 7th one, I went to Melbourne in Australia. So anyway, after a while, after like 6 weeks in Australia, I failed miserably, so I come back. And then I went to Metro Radio in Newcastle upon Tyne and failed miserably. And Red Rose Radio took me on, sort of off the dole, you know, because, well, it's nice on the dole. And the only reason I've stayed in radio for the 2.5 years I've been at Red Rose is it's got naught to do with me, just like the tape that they sent to this awards thing's got naught to do with me. It's to do with a guy called Michael Green, whose name you've read 3 times tonight, and he got naught. So I think he can have this, because he produces me as well, and he tells me everything I've got to say, but the most important bit, he tells me the bits I can't say. So this is for Michael Green. Thank you.
So there we are, we've heard from one of the big heroes of the early days. Let's backtrack a bit now from 1985 and hear from another one of the big names from the early 80s.
Sally Moon. I had formerly been the promotions and marketing manager and had filled one slot on a Saturday night and had broken the mould slightly with the type of programming that I was doing, because I did 2 things which weren't being done at the time. One, I was playing lots of music from the 60s and 70s, which nobody really did. And 2, I played a whole hour of music for romantics, as I called it, which was very different in those days because nobody had ever done it. Of course, now on every radio station you can tune into, and they're all either doing love tracks or, you know, music under the sheets or whatever it's called. The response to that first programme, which I'd done by default, was really phenomenal. I distinctly remember having over 300 letters, because we used letters in those days. I mean, it wasn't text or email or anything easy like that. I then graduated on to doing the evening show most nights of the week, as well as doing the other job, but then gradually the promotions and marketing faded away and the broadcasting took over. It was the response we got from the people of Lancashire that made it special. I always maintain that.
After Sally Moon, in the mid-80s, one of the presenters was Derek Webster.
Derek Webster!
Yeah, I just said that, thanks. God, these jingle singers.
We used to close down originally at midnight, and then they decided to extend and stay open 24 hours a day.
24 hours a day.
So I was on from 2 o'clock in the morning till 6, and in those days we used to have what was known as needle time restrictions, which means that you could only play so many records on established labels by established artists. So I would be there in the middle of the night between 2 and 6 playing music for night shift workers with records like Russ Abbott and Atmosphere, which was hugely popular, but we could play that as many times as we liked. And the other was a 12-inch version of a dance tune that featured cows mooing to a dance beat. And this was hugely successful to night shift workers across Lancashire and the North West listening to the radio station in the middle of the night.
Farmyard animals and dance music. Oh, how musical tastes have changed. Now we move on to one of the most dramatic events in the history of Red Rose Radio. This happened in 1984.
It's 5 o'clock. This is Red Rose Reports with Keith Macklin and Mike Henfield in the studio and Michael Green in the village of St Michael's-on-Wyre, the hamlet which is tonight reeling from the tragedy of the Lancashire explosion.
It was a warm evening on Wednesday, May the 23rd in 1984, when a coach took 44 people from the village of St Michael's-on-Wyre to visit a pumping station at Abbeystead a few miles away. They were watching a demonstration in a building set into the hillside there when there was an explosion. 16 people were killed. Everyone there was badly burned. Programme controller Keith Macklin was on air with Mike Henfield, who was the news editor at Red Rose at the time.
That particular night, we decided to actually get healthy. We decided that the newsroom was going out to play tennis. So we hired a court at Moore Park. We borrowed some rackets. We even got the gear on, the shorts and the T-shirts and the whole thing. And I must admit, we just looked the part. And we'd been playing about an hour or so when one of the lads who normally drove in tapes, played the tapes into the programmes, came charging up on a bike, shouting that there was a very serious incident somewhere in Lancashire. That's all we knew at this time, and that there may be people dead in it. So we got in our cars, went down to the station, still in our tennis gear. Chris Ryder and I took over the newsroom, and we went on air with what we knew, which was very, very sketchy to kick off with. But then as time went by, we'd got a young reporter who I think went to Thames Television afterwards, called Judith Burns. We sent her to the scene. I was presenting the live inserts into the recorded programme, and Chris was doing the reports as they came in. As luck would have it, Keith Macklin, who had been watching the TV at a friend's house, and I'd just done a piece for News at 10. Keith saw the ITN piece, rang up immediately and said, "Do you need any extra help?" And I said, "Oh, I'm going to bite your arm off. Can you get out there as soon as you can, Keith? Grab a tape recorder, get over there to St Michael's." And I'm glad to say that Keith did straight away, and we had tremendous